Hello, and welcome to Varn Blog. Today, I'm going to discuss what we've seen with populism, or what we could call thermostatic populism or thermostatic politics. All right. Now, I'm going to read a definition, and this is from Good Authority. I'm not going to read the whole article, even though I have a potency to do that, and I will link it in the show notes. But I want to read what thermostatic politics is, and we're going to contrast it with anti-systemic politics, because a lot of people seem to confuse the two things, and even I used to talk about them as if they're interchangeable. That whatever seems to oppose the current regime can seem like that is anti-systemic. It's not. Populism is really easy for elites to manipulate, but nonetheless, it's good to understand what thermostatic politics is and what anti-systemic politics is, and why a system is not just the thermostat. And popularity isn't leverage. There's a bunch of things that I've been trying to get people to really understand lately about political systems. So let's get into it. We need to talk about it. How did that become so common on? I mean, I keep on hearing this on both YouTube and short form videos. We need to talk about it. Let's talk about it. Like, such a awkward and artificial constraint. Anyway, that's a digression. Let's get back to the main point. That's thermostatic politics in action. This phenomena, where the public preference shifts in the opposite direction of government action, is known as thermostatic politics. Now, notice that we talk about the public shifting anti-systemically, but this is not actually against the system. This is responding from one part of the system to another. This is not what Wallerstein and Arrighi and Samir Amin were talking about in world systems theory, but it can seem like it is. All right, let's go back to this piece. The thermostatic model, first formalized by political scientist Christopher Wezin in 1999, describes the public's reactions to government policies as akin to a thermostat adjusting to a room temperature. Just as the thermostat signals when I cool down or warm up based on current political conditions, public opinion signals to policymakers when to increase or decrease policy activity. But thermostatic politics isn't just about public reacting to policy. It's about democratic representation, or how policymakers respond to public opinion. Ideally, governments adjust their actions to reflect shifts in public preferences, creating a feedback loop. This two-way dynamic is central to the thermostatic model and a hallmark of a halfway democratic system, though it varies significantly by issue and political context. So the pendulum swinging back and forth, it's actually part of the system. It can seem anti-systemic because you're opposing part of a current administrative regime, or the primary party in the legislature, or even the courts. But what you are doing in another way is actually adjusting the model of politics. Now, when politics gets out of whack, they can't adjust to the thermostat, and we'll get to that. The thermostatic model. Thermostatic politics is a powerful idea and grounded in the evidence that public opinion is not random or subjective. For example, when we have Democratic presidents in their first term, both in the Obama first term and in the Biden first term, and they only said worm term, you see massive increases in conservative politics on margin, particularly amongst independents. But when a Republican is in power, often the backlash is even worse. So it shows you what's going on here. It is not random, right? Uh, when a government increases welfare and defense spending, for example, the public tends to favor spending less. Conversely, when welfare and defense spending budgets are cut, calls for an increase in spending go louder. People are reacting. It is inherently reactionary in the small r sense of that term. I don't mean it in the fact that they're politically conservative, although in some ways all partisans favoring a current party's political position are politically conservative. So and the fact that they are trying to conserve a particular view of politics. Many studies show that negative feedback loop beyond the US government spending, from racial and healthcare policies in the United States to asylum policies and European unification issues abroad. This dynamic reflects democracy's built in feedback loop, where voters use their stated preferences to nudge policy, very Cass Sustain of this author, but and the government more broadly in a desired direction, and the voters often succeed. There's evidence against that, but the evidence to get that against that voters succeed in getting their policy done. They actually do often succeed in changing regimes. Um, for example, public opinion grew increasingly conservative during the relatively liberal years of the Obama administration, 2009 and 2017, illustrating how shifts in government action can provoke a corresponding pull towards its ideological opposite and vice versa. And what makes thermostatic politics remarkable is that the public doesn't need to have detailed knowledge of policies. Instead, they rely on general perceptions. It's all vibes, motherfucker. Often shaped by media coverages. It's all manipulated vibes, motherfucker, to, to emulate whether the government is moving too far in one direction, or in some cases, the response can escalate into a full-scale public backlash. So, such widespread public opposition undermines the goals of a certain government policy change, essentially breaking the thermostat well beyond mere adjustment. But not all publicly stated views are alike. How do we know what voters actually want? Most public opinion surveys capture what the polling experts call relative preferences. Do people want more or less of something relative to the status quo? These are the exact preferences that are the most thermostatic, shifting in response to perceived policy changes. Whether those policy changes are real or substantive is not relevant here. Right? For example, if government spending on healthcare is rising, the public may demand less spending, even if their absolute preference is for both healthcare funding to remain unchanged. Absolute preferences, in contrast, represent people's ideal point that change infrequently. A person may have a long term belief that government should stop all immigration of a certain kind, regardless of the year to year fluctuations. These stable absolute benchmarks anchor public opinion, but they are harder to measure directly, and they are ideological. Those are ideological core beliefs. However, they can change too. This distinction matters because relative preferences dominate polling data and reflect short term adjustments. That's actually important. Policymakers, however, are left guessing whether or not these shifts indicate a change in normally deep ideological commitments are a temporary reaction to policy overreach. Now, I think we're actually seeing deep ideological commitments really become a problem for pretty much everybody. But it's something to think about here. When you read these pollings, you need to know what they're actually measuring. And we're not going to go into all the thermostatic issues, but this is what people often confuse with anti-systemic momentum. And I used to talk about it this way, actually, that this was anti-systemic because I was taking the regime to represent the system of the regime. But thermostatic politics only wants to get rid of the regime in relative cases. People become more conservative, small c, when there are assaults on things that they feel like are relatively stable, even if when those things are run more liberally or conservatively in the past, they were very unhappy with them. That's not anti-systemic. That doesn't want to change the system at hand. Anti-systemic movements actually tend to be, if we use world systems theory, more international. Right? They are, and they can come up both right and left, but what they want to do is break up systems of international relations, trade, etc. Decouple, recouple, move things around. And in that sense, most voters are not anti-systemic, but certain presidents or administrations are. Are there favoring one side of the system to such a degree that they actually endanger the entire systemic apparatus? That's not the same thing as people reacting to policy. And the more unstable things get and the less satisfied they are, one will see that thermostatic pendulum swing. But there is a point where really that could swing so far in one direction that equilibrium becomes not possible for public opinion, and there really is something anti-systemic emerging. The question for us today is that happening in the United States? And that is yet to be seen. Good luck. Protect your peace. Like and subscribe. Hit the bell. We have a Patreon for more. You can get access for as little as $4 a month. But if you don't need that, I love a comment or a review. Do what you like if you want to. And if you don't want to, you can insult me and I'll probably not care. Have a great day.